Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. You know, some war correspondents had the freedom to roam on battlefields during combat situations as far as their curiosity and their sensibilities could take them. One of the more ambitious of this breed is pictured here. His name is Charles Carleton Coffin. His life dates were 1823 to 1896. He was a New Hampshire native who was pro Union, anti slavery, and 37 years old when the war began. Physical limitations prevented him from joining the military, and so he turned his pen instead of the sword to do his part to save the Republic. He turned up at the First Battle of Bull Run in July 1861, described in vivid detail what he saw, what he experienced, and was immediately hired by impressed editors of the Boston Journal to be a war correspondent. Thus began a 4-year journey for Coffin, went through all the major and momentous battles in the Eastern Theater. Coffin was something of a Civil War zealot, showing up everywhere: Gettysburg, Appomattox, and just about any place else. He even took a detour from the Eastern Theater in early 1865 from the Army of the Potomac and shot down to the South Carolina coast to be eyewitness to the Stars and Stripes being raised over Fort Sumter after Charleston fell to U.S. forces, and then he zipped back up to the Army of the Potomac for the Appomattox campaign. Coffin is a bit unusual because he seemed to enjoy good relationships, cultivated good relationships with all the top generals, Grant, Meade, and others. Now, of course, this was in the Eastern Theater. I do wonder what would have happened had Coffin met up with Sherman, who was, as you students of the Civil War know, famously unhappy, hated reporters. Of Coffin's many writings, I want to share one of them with you. And this is a small piece. It documents a 12-mile ride from Hanover, Pennsylvania to Gettysburg on July 2nd, 1863. It's the second day of the battle. Ambitious as always, Coffin shows up on the battlefield, climbs the stairs of the iconic Evergreen Cemetery gate. I know this is a view that many of you know about, and took in a view of the battle-scarred landscape. In his own words, I want to share the account of his trip from Hanover and what he saw from the top of the gate on July 2nd. You're going to hear Coffin mention various farmhouses by names of the owner that dotted the area. Major General Oliver Otis Howard, who had suffered the amputation of an arm the previous year in fighting during the Peninsula Campaign, and also now the commander of the 11th Corps. That corps had been hit really hard by Confederates during the first day's fight just a day earlier, and Howard's younger brother Charles, who served as a staff aide. So here we go. I'm going to share with you this excerpt, this passage about coming into Gettysburg on July 2nd. Imagine with me, if you will. Coffin writes, quote, "The sun was just rising when I mounted my horse at Hanover, 12 miles away. I rode towards Gettysburg, passing a long train of wagons and many soldiers from the 5th Corps who had dropped, weary and exhausted, by the roadside. The troops of the Corps were east of Rock Creek, where they had been halted by General Meade in anticipation of his attacking Lee. But he having determined to fight a defensive battle, they filed southward through the fields, crossed the creek, turned into a pasture, and threw themselves wearily upon the ground. I rode up to the Baltimore Turnpike with the 12th Corps in my right hand, partly hidden from the view by the woods, passed the toll gate from which the tollman had fled, reached the summit of a hill where the soldiers of the 11th Corps on my right were laying down, and those of the First Corps on my left were crouching behind a stone wall. On both sides, the artillerymen had thrown up breastworks to shield themselves in part. Dismounting from my horse, I climbed the stairs of the arched gateway of the cemetery and beheld the grand panorama of the field where yesterday's battle had been fought. The town, with its houses of red brick, its spires and steeples, the white walls of Pennsylvania College north of town, the almshouse beyond, where Barlow's division had fought and left its line of dead. With my glass, I could see the prostrate forms lying where they fell. A yellow flag was flying above the cupola of the theological seminary, which had been taken for a hospital. The fields in the distance by Hare's Tavern, where the Confederate cannon had been planted, were dotted with white tents. Trains of wagons were winding here and there, and horsemen were riding rapidly. Southward were fields and woodlands and farmhouses, the ground where the great battle was to be fought. Eastward was Culp's Hill. Upon its western face, the soldiers were at work with picks and shovels, throwing up a breastwork, behind which stood a Union battery, the 5th Maine. We shall see it again by and by. Immediately around, upon Cemetery Hill, cannon were thickly planted, some of them pointing north, others west, and others southwest. A short distance southward, across the Taneytown Road, was the grove on the farm of Mr. Ziegler. On the Emmitsburg Road was the brick house of Mr. Codori, and a large barn. Beyond, upon the west side of the road, was the house of Peter Rogers, and still farther away, the farmhouse of Mr. Sherfy, and an orchard of peach trees, whence a crossroad ran eastward towards Little Round Top. Eastward of the peach trees, across the green fields, a quarter of a mile, was the house and barn of Mr. Trossel. I could see cannon along the Emmitsburg Road pointing westward, and regiments were lying down by the house of Mr. Codori, and behind it, the troops of the Third Corps, resting themselves after their hard march from Emmitsburg, kindling fires and cooking coffee. By the house of Mr. Leicester, on the Taneytown Road, with headquarters flag of General Meade waving. The Second Corps was on the ridge west of it. Long lines of white-topped wagons dotted the landscape eastward. Descending from the gateway, I mounted my horse to ride into Gettysburg and came to a soldier crouching behind a picket fence. "Halt! Where are you going?" he said. "Into Gettysburg." "Into Gettysburg? Do you know where you are?" "I'm on the picket line. You see that brick house with the window open? That is full of Confederates, and they've been picking us off all the morning, and the quicker you get out of here, the better it'll be for you." The house was within pistol shot, and I rode back to the cemetery. General Howard was there. His servant came with his breakfast of cold ham, hard biscuit, and coffee. "You were just in season," he said. He had deep religious convictions and reverently asked God's blessing before eating. "Lieutenant," he said to an officer, "have a detail of men to take up these gravestones and lay them carefully upon the ground. If they are left standing, the cannonballs will knock them to pieces and send the fragments about our ears. The people of the town can reset them." He told the story of the first day's engagement and pointed out the positions of the troops. Looking across the houses, we could see at that moment a column of Confederates on the Chambersburg Road. See there, General. Let Osborne open up on them with his artillery," shouted Major Charles Howard of his staff. No, the time hasn't come. Don't be in a hurry about it. You will have enough fighting before sunset." So there you have the account of Charles Carleton Coffin, of his 12-mile trek from Hanover, Pennsylvania to Gettysburg, his climb up to the staircase taking him to the top of the gate of the cemetery, and the view of what he saw, the cannons, and then his attempt to get into Gettysburg and encountering a Picket who just probably thought he was crazy, his entrance back into the cemetery, and then a meeting with Major General Oliver Howard. So thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.